Hi everyone, Daniela here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Warming the Bench. We are so excited to kick off this podcast and we are grateful that you're coming on this journey with us. Please bear with us as we work through audio, transitions, editing, and all that fun stuff. We're definitely learning as we go along, but we're going to get better at it. But we really appreciate you being here and we hope you enjoy the first episode and all the episodes to come.
Hello, I'm Bev, located in Bristol in England, and you are?
Daniela, located just outside Toronto, Canada.
Okay. It's about 18 months ago or so, Daniela and we met on a women's football group. And we kind of clicked, didn't we, from our exchanges, our conversations and comments. And from there,
Yep.
we decided to put together a podcast. And maybe for about last 6 months, Dan,
hmm
last
Yeah, that
six
sounds right.
months that we have been working very hard with a company called Boda, all women team, I must add. So it's an all women team. We've all been working together to put together the strategy, the visuals, the logos to come together and produce this podcast. We also have an Instagram and Facebook, so you can follow
hmm
us there too. Because our aim is to build, one of our aims is to build a community supporting the women's game. Would you agree, Dan? Is there anything I've left out so far?
No, we've got absolutely nailed it. This is what we've been, our little passion project we've been working on for a while, as Bev has said, and we're really excited to finally be bringing that to you.
Well, there's something quite different and unique about us because I'm older than Danny. I'm
Mhm.
60 and Danny's, what are you, Dan? 35?
I'm, yep, 35. You got it straight on.
I remembered, yes. There is
You
a
remember.
timeline. Yeah, there is a timeline. And within that timeline, if you can imagine, there are lots of social things going on, societal things going on, cultural changes going
hmm
on, political changes, economical changes, historical changes. That's the backdrop. And we have a long timeline between us. And added to that,
hmm
I'm based in England and you're based in Canada. And added to that, we also want to make this interactive. So we will post every week in advance, we will post the topic of what we will be discussing in the next week ahead so that those of you can comment in in the previous episode, put your comments in and we can read some of those comments and use them within the podcast on the day. So it really is about building a community. So if I kick off then and I talk about the timeline, and I'm going to start from the 70s, okay, because that's when I remember. And it's not anything I've researched, it's what's in my memory. And I'm thinking maybe it's because it's quite emotional. Some of the things I'm going to share are quite emotional and very sad. And it is about the men's game because that's what I watched. There was no such thing on my orbit as the women's game. No such thing. It wasn't televised. All I
hmm
knew was the men's game. So that's my starting point, really. So it's the 70s and 80s. Some of it is also sentiment. Some of it picks up in my relationship with my dad. It can, I know, I lost him when he was in his late 30s. So for me, that kind of brings back memories and the connection between me and my
hmm
dad and what we used to do as a family. Yeah. And football, men's
Absolutely.
football being a big part of that. Sorry, Dan.
No, no, go for it. I was just gonna say that, um, in just globally, the game is such something that connects everybody. So just even to hear you say that this is a sentimental thing, and it kind of goes back to your connection with your dad and your family, what that kind of looked like. It absolutely makes sense because sport connects us in a lot of ways globally, but also connects people individually in their family, their personal relationships. So I'm really glad that you said that.
Yes, it's the memories that you can draw on, can because you can draw on big
Hmm.
moments like World Cups, European Cups, significant
Hmm.
events, and it's a metric. So starting for the 70s,
Yeah.
it's going to be a metric. And what I'm going to ask you to do, Dan, is note down
Hmm.
common denominators from the timeline that obviously I'm going to kick off. So those common
Right.
denominators and patterns that you can pick up, yeah? Because it
Yeah.
might be relevant not just to the men's game, I think it's also relevant to the women's game, and why we have
Hmm.
an interesting intersection that in some groups men really enjoy the women's game, but there are also factions that don't and make their voice
Yeah.
very clear. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Definitely do.
Not always in a good way.
We
Okay.
know. Nope.
So here we go then. This is the 1970s. So picture this. There's me and my dad and my mum in the kitchen. Okay. It's interesting because in my family, the kitchen seems to be the hub where lots of things
Hmm.
happen. Making food, eating food, family parties like birthday celebrations. It was quite a hub. This is on a
Hmm.
Sunday. This is on a Sunday, and my mum, now she is in the background and she's busy baking away, busy putting the Sunday lunch together. And it's like a military operation, Dan. Honestly, she's got the baked potatoes going on, she's got the cauliflower on, she's got the carrots on. Oh my God, the meat is in the oven, spitting away in the fat.
Sounds
And
good.
it is.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was like a military operation because my dad was insistent it was on the table at 12 o'clock.
Right.
So
Okay. That makes
there's
sense.
me, there's me and my dad, and we're on the kitchen, sat against the kitchen table, and we are playing Spot the Ball. Now, Spot the Ball
Hmm.
in the 70s was a competition that the main Sunday papers ran, like the Sunday People and the Sunday Mirror, etc. And what
Hmm.
it was a picture of the men's game, a photograph of the men's game, and they were looking up or looking in
Hmm.
different directions, but the ball was taken out. And what you had to do, you had about 20 crosses, 20, 30, 40 crosses, and you could pay for the amount of crosses that you could put onto this photograph. So
Oh, wow.
cross that was kind of the ball was nearest in the cross, the center of the cross that the ball was in, you could win prize money.
Hmm.
So me and my dad were figuring that
Interesting.
out, and we would call over to mum and we would say, come on then, Joan, you have a guess as well. And we would all do this while the Sunday roast was cooking. But I have to say, as
Hmm.
much as I adored my dad, it was very, very, very clear conjugal roles within the family.
Hmm.
I don't know if you
Mm.
recognize that in
I
any way, Dan.
Yeah, honestly, as soon as you said there was, a little bit of an insistence also on, lunch being prepared at a certain time and your mom running this, military style operation to quote you, it's very clear those very like that segregated roles within the family and what that kind of probably mirrored for the time as well in terms of traditional upbringings.
Yes. No, most definitely. I
Hmm.
would describe my
Yeah.
upbringing as working class, but affluent working
Hmm.
class. So we did have money. We were able to
Hmm.
do things that my schoolmates and my acquaintances weren't able to do. And that changed the
Mm.
trajectory. or I'll get the word out in a minute, trajectory for me in comparison to others.
Yeah.
And also because my
Hmm.
mum, well, she had middle class aspirations and she was
Hmm.
very much for education, 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 especially for me as a woman.
Got it.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
those
And would
variables, those differences
mhm.
change the trajectory. I'm pretty sure of it.
And would you, I'm wondering, would you say that even as a young child, did you notice those kind of roles in the family, but did you also notice potentially how your mom had a little bit of these differences or maybe had things that she knew that she probably wasn't able to achieve, but she wanted you to achieve as a young child? Or was that something you started to see as you got older?
No, I saw that from a child. Yeah, I felt
Mhm.
that as opposed to see it. Does that make sense? I felt
Mm.
it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
felt, yeah, yeah, I felt it. I
Mhm.
felt it in her, um, maybe her attitude, in the things that she did.
Right.
I was a
Mhm.
tomboy. I wasn't dressed up. I wasn't that kind of girl. I was a tomboy. Never had any
Mhm.
dollies. I was into Lego,
Mhm.
Meccano at the time. So very much like
Mhm.
practicing to be an engineer, if you ask me. It was all about construction and
Yeah.
building. Yeah. And for those
Mhm.
those times, that was quite
Interesting.
different. And I remember announcing to my nan at 7 years old, I might add, right, Nan, I will never
Mhm.
get married and I am never going to have children. And that's exactly what I did. Never got married,
Wow.
never had children. So it came from
Mhm.
somewhere. And I do believe,
Yeah.
Dan, it was from mum because
Mhm.
I would say that mum had her foot on the accelerator and dreamed through me, and dad had his foot on the
Mhm.
brake.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. That just that what you said there, because you can almost see at the time, and Bev, you can speak probably to this a little bit more about the historical, what was going on just in broader society at that time, how that would be probably more common than we think in families. You
Yes,
might not have heard about it as well, because I think that at that time, again, historically and societal wise, women were in this space of breaking out of a little bit of traditional scenarios and really fighting for a lot of change and a lot of social differences. And so I would feel that that's probably very, very reminiscent of a lot of different families at the time, and maybe what women were feeling that we didn't have any access or view into at the time.
absolutely. You can see, there were in the UK, there were significant changes in the law. So in 1969, there were
Hmm.
changes in the divorce law. Then there were changes in the 1970s, around about the mid 70s. There were changes in employment law. So racism and sexual discrimination, those were starting to come in. So it tells you that things were shifting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very, very fascinating.
So one of the things, besides setting the scene with my family, is the backdrop to the 1970s and
Hmm.
into the 80s was football hooliganism. Now, I have to
Mm,
say that England had a terrible reputation, not only in this country, but abroad. So whenever we went abroad to play
mm,
major tournaments, there were warnings issued, especially from Germany, if I remember rightly. Especially from Germany, they would say,
mm.
if you come over, there's low tolerance. You will be arrested. That's it. You know?
Mhm.
Can you remember any of
Yeah.
that?
I
And
wonder what
was
I can. It's a little it's a little vague for me, but I definitely remember that kind of into the 90s. And I do remember questioning even as a kid, like, why is that? And I remember questioning, was it fair? Like, I didn't know obviously the background of it and so forth. So I'm wondering from your side of it, where does that driven from? And was there maybe at some point, did it get to a point where it was, this is a little bit, it's unfair now to keep labeling us this way, or was it something that has stopped? Or I just kind of from your perspective, what that looks like.
Well, I remember the football because there were only when I was a child, there were only three channels. That was BBC One,
Mhm.
BBC Two, and ITV. So in the morning, we kids would go out and have a laugh and a joke, and you'd also have Saturday children's TV like Swap Shop, and things like that. And in the afternoon, it was all
Mhm.
sport, and I would watch Grandstand with my dad. Again, it was that connection with him. And the origins actually of football, I know that it's bandied around that men's football has been around for about 100 years, but actually, in my research, in padding out my memories, it goes back as far as the medieval times. And in the medieval
Mhm.
times, there was lots of like village rivalry. So they would have a ball,
Mhm.
something that resembled a ball, and it was a free for all. And there were fights and scraps, and people got injured, but it was village against village. And it was those working class origins that you wondered if it had kind of, the residue of that just kept going through to the 60s and 70s and 80s. But the sociological aspect around it, because you asked the question, the
Mhm.
sociological research around hooliganism was that it was about identity and belonging, that lots of men felt marginalized. Maybe it was because of home. Maybe it was the change in roles within the family, that maybe in some way they felt marginalized at home. And then that is, about identity then. Well, if I'm affiliated to a certain club, I've got an identity. And if we meet up on a Saturday at 12 o'clock, we can kick the hell out of Chelsea. We could kick the hell out of Arsenal. And I'm something because I'm leading a gang.
So it felt like it almost provided them a space of belonging
Yes,
because maybe what they were experiencing at home or in whatever career, jobs, in friend groups or whatever was not serving them in the way that they probably anticipated it should be serving them.
absolutely. And we've talked about this behind the scenes. And, in England, class
Mhm.
is still a big thing. It was certainly a big thing back then. You could watch the
Yeah,
TV
definitely.
and it was prevalent, it was
Mhm.
prominent about class, you know?
Mhm.
And
Very, yeah.
yeah, and so there was, a lot of the authority figures back then, like politicians, police, school figures, these figures were trusted in the community,
Mhm.
but there were also factions linked to hooliganism that were very much
Mm.
against authority figures because
Yeah.
they,
Oh, I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it makes
sorry.
sense because of what, yeah, no, 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 it's okay. What it makes sense though, especially against authority, because that identity piece is missing, right? So as soon as your identity is challenged, anything that tries to contain you and so forth is something you want to push against.
Absolutely. That was exactly right. It really was. And
Mhm.
so that kind of brings me neatly on to the 80s. And it links beautifully with what you've just said, Dan. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And into the 80s then. And there are some disasters now, stadium disasters. Okay.
Mm.
And the first one that I can remember, and is coming from memory, and then I've padded it out with research. I've fleshed out the bones, if you like. This is the 11th of
Right.
May, 1985, and I'm watching
Mhm.
this on the television, okay? And this is
Mhm.
Valley Parade, Bradford Stadium.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
it's Bradford have got promotion to the second division. Now, Bradford were
Mhm.
struggling. At times they went into liquidation almost, and, there was crowdfunding, a community come together, they got the money raised, and there were all sorts of ups and downs with the history. So, to get promotion to
Mhm.
the second division, you can imagine on that day of the 11th of May, that was a big thing.
Mm,
Everybody was
of
gathering. There was
course.
going to be the cup, that was going to be awarded, and there were extra people there, and it was a big, big thing. Yeah. So they were
Hmm.
playing Lincoln City. They were playing Lincoln City, and the game. If picture this, the stadium. I'm going to paint a picture of what the stadium looked like in terms of how it was built materially, with its materials. So the main stadium was almost wooden, okay? So the
Oh,
benches,
wow. Hmm.
partly wooden, I think there were plastic seatings. All the slats underneath the seatings, well, they were all wooden. The roof was
Hmm.
wooden, and then there was
Oh, wow.
roofing. Classic roofing, which meant
Mm.
that there was felt on top of the roof, and then there was bitumen on top of that. Okay, so plastic,
Oh,
wood,
hmm.
bitumen, and felt all there. Okay,
Wow.
so you
Hmm.
can you can
Huh.
you can get a sense of what I'm heading to here, can't you?
Yep,
A, a
absolutely.
dad, a dad and his son,
Huh.
they were sat in their seats, and the dad dropped a cigarette, and it went through the
Hmm.
flooring
Oh,
and down into
oh,
waist that was about knee deep in height. Okay, so the
oh.
dad poured his drink in order to douse out the cigarette, and he instructed his son to do the same thing. So they both poured on the drink in order to douse out the cigarette.
Hmm.
They thought they had achieved that, but they hadn't. And then all
Oh,
of a
boy.
sudden, there's smoke bellowing up through the slats, the floors, okay? And within
Hmm.
4 minutes, the main stadium was completely wiped out. There were people running away from the stadium, and all the while, there's a commentator commentating on everything that's unfolding. Can you
Oh,
imagine
my
that?
goodness. And you're watching this.
Watching this on TV, we are watching this unfold on TV, and it's
Wow.
horrific. It's absolutely
And of
horrific.
course.
But what I don't get, Dan,
Wow.
is as this is happening and fans are coming away from the main stand and getting out, there are fans
Mm.
waving and jumping up and down and cheering and laughing to the cameras.
Almost as if it's like a joke.
Yes,
And it's
you
not a joke. It's
wonder,
a serious,
yeah.
horrific problem. Oh,
So it's much like,
wow.
great, you can see me, I'm on camera. You wonder, what
Mhm.
was going on there, the
Mm.
mentality, behavior of that. It was incredible.
Right.
Now, when they did the
Wow.
post-mortem into this, Dan, when they did the post-mortem and, the forensics, etc., looking into this, I mean, that was like a furnace. They found bodies, charred bodies that were sat in the standstill where they hadn't been able to get out because the fire was so swift. So there were charred bodies still sat down on the seats.
Oh my God, that's horrific.
It is. Yeah.
Wow. That is horrible. My goodness.
Yeah. No, that
And
came
I can't
down.
imagine yeah.
Go on.
No, no, I was just gonna say I can't imagine just watching that on like unfold almost and then seeing the aftermath and like you said, the postmortem and hearing those details. That's just unfathomable.
It is. It absolutely is. And remember, it was in knee deep in waste. And, there was
Mm,
no health and safety that was prevalent within those days. People freely smoked.
of
They
course, yeah.
Yeah, so there weren't legislation surrounding that, but there were legacies and changes that came as a result of that, if you like. Yeah. So
Of course.
health and safety was introduced. They looked at the way that the stadiums were constructed. Communities got involved in supporting each other. So there was a legacy that was left following the Bradford Stadium disaster. Lots of good things came from that.
Hmm.
Um, then in
Yeah.
1989, 1989,
Mm.
on April the 15th, which is only just recent, and I wonder if you
Yeah.
might know this, but it's the
Hmm.
Hillsborough disaster. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm. Is this um the one that's connected to Liverpool? Am I right in
Yeah,
saying that?
yeah. Up in
That's the one.
Sheffield.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Yep. Unfortunately,
absolutely.
yeah, have heard of that.
Yeah. How
Hmm.
did you hear of that, Dan?
Uh, oh, I think just through a greater like being a football fan. It's one of the ones I think everyone, even if you're not a huge fan of the game, you've probably heard about it. For
Yeah,
those who maybe don't know, just as a side note, Liverpool's thing "You'll Never Walk Alone." It's their kind of their anthem, and that stems from that disaster.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this was
Hmm.
all about, you can imagine. So I think there were a number of pens, maybe three or four pens. There's a main
Hmm.
pen. Now, the main pen is standing room only. And the Leppins lane end
Hmm.
is the Liverpool fans lane. So in this main pen, the police are letting in all these fans and it's just overcrowded. But either
Yeah.
side, the
Hmm.
pens are okay. They're okay. There's room for people to go there. But this main pen
Hmm.
is overflowing. But outside, there are also fans that are caught within the turnstiles. So what they do, they open one of the gates, I think it was C section. They open the gates and they let more fans in to this already overcrowded pen. And so very,
Hmm.
very quickly, there are fans that get trampled, 766 injuries there was, 97 fatalities on that day. Absolutely horrific. For people that were trampled, people that just couldn't get out, they were up against the parameters, they were just squashed. And I don't
That's
know if
horrible.
you're also aware, Dan, but the families of those that died fought very hard to get
Hmm.
notification that it was the police's fault. Because what happened, and this
Hmm.
links up to a point that you made earlier about hooliganism, and is this carry on? Is this a
Hmm.
branding of working class people? And the fact was, initially, the
Hmm.
police blamed
Hmm.
hooliganism.
Mm. That's not surprising. If you look at just historically things that have happened in society and maybe where groups of individuals who are maybe lower class, if you want to say
Yeah.
that, or marginalized groups of individuals, there's a lot of that in general. So that's not surprising to hear.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it
Hmm.
goes back, yeah, it goes back to what I said about the sociology around hooliganism, in that it is about identity. It is about saying, hey, hang on a minute, I do exist,
Hmm.
we do exist, and we participate
Hmm.
in society, very often not listened to. And when you're not listened to,
Hmm.
and you're living
Hmm.
in an area or a location where it's poverty stricken, that's, I think, where trouble starts to brew.
Of course. Yeah. Historically and everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you see
Hmm.
your resources as being less than in comparison to others, more richer people, more richer groups.
Hmm. Of course, yeah, and it's like I said, it's not just located in England. It's a very common problem and has been for decades upon decades and centuries. Honestly, if you study, back to medieval times, back to Roman times, that has always been a part of how things are shaped and historical things that have happened throughout those periods. It's always kind of tied to that distinction between poverty and what's going on at the time and how people are affected by their surroundings and their environment for sure.
Absolutely. And those authority, those political figures, they don't listen.
Hmm.
They brand, you know, they
They don't.
brand the punishment, but they don't listen in between. And maybe
Hmm.
just sat down around, you know, around a table, having
Yep.
conversations with group leaders out in communities, it might have made things different.
Hmm.
So yeah, those
For
two
sure.
stadiums disasters, that, you know, those were horrific. I
Hmm.
cannot fail to forget that.
Hmm.
Also
Of
says
course not.
something about
Definitely
men's
not.
football. It also says something about men's
Hmm.
football. Now I know, you know, we've talked about women's football and it is unequal in all these various different things. But you know, what does so
Hmm.
far? What does it say about men's football? It's not a great picture so far. I don't think it is.
No, definitely isn't. No, it has it's mirrored with a lot of difficult and very traumatic situations for sure.
Absolutely. So I'm coming on to the
Hmm.
1990s now, and I'm going
Hmm.
to talk about Justin Fashanu. Justin Fashanu
Hmm.
and his brother John. Now, Justin, now he
Hmm.
was a gay footballer, but it was kept quiet.
Hmm.
Nobody knew, but there was a paper, Sunday paper, that got sniff of something. Yeah. And they went to
Hmm. Hmm.
Justin, and another paper got whiff that another paper was about to expose Justin for being gay. I mean, he was in the top echelons of football. He was a £1 million football player. So he was brilliant, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Of course, yeah.
the Sun offered him a sum of money to tell his story in
Mm.
his own words before the other paper
Mm.
got to it, and you know, they it would be sensationalized, etc., etc. Anyway,
Mhm.
saying that, the Sun, this is the headlines of the Sun, and it goes as follows. Now tell me what you think of the language of this. It's
Mhm.
£1 million soccer star, I am gay, Justin Fashanu confesses. Now what do you think when you hear that headline?
I mean, the first thing that just kind of comes to mind is that not even what I think about the actual headline, but just in that moment, if I'm trying to place myself in that moment, it must have felt for him something that he just had to come out and talk about because it was going to be, put everywhere, regardless of what he thought or how he felt about wanting to keep his identity or who he was to himself. And
Mm,
I think just it's so broad, it's so like in your face, I'm gay, I confess. And it's almost like he's confessing a bad thing and they're trying to frame it as if it's a bad thing or a negative thing.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's almost like he's committed a
Hmm.
crime, isn't it?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And I mean,
Wow.
even
Hmm.
he was based at Nottingham Forest, and his manager dubbed him a
Hmm.
bloody poof when he actually got to hear about it. A bloody poof is what he called
Wow.
him. So if your manager is not going to support you,
Hmm.
and John Fashanu, that's Justin's brother, he
Hmm.
paid him later on, right, you know, many years on. He admitted that
Hmm.
he was paid him 75,000 to keep him, you know, not to say anything, because it was about
Wow.
brandishing, you know, it was about brandishing. Well, if
Hmm.
my brother is gay, are people going to think me as gay also?
Of course. Yeah. It's a sign of the times and so stark in, I think, in comparison to what we see now as fans of the women's game and how different that is,
Yes.
especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus inclusion, which is a really interesting comparison.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's safe spaces, isn't it? When you go to a stadium to watch a women's football game, it's safe.
Hmm.
And the demographics of
Hmm.
it are quite different in comparison to men's, although that is shifting,
For
obviously.
sure.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
right,
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
linked to Justin Fashion You at the time. So the
Hmm.
backdrop, the backdrop to that is that 1990s dealing with the AIDS crisis as well. And I can remember quite
Hmm.
distinctly there was an advert about asking people to be careful in, passing on the AIDS disease.
Hmm.
And it was a tombstone. I can remember distinctly. It was a tombstone that fell down and it had AIDS on there. And it was quite scaremongering, etc., etc. And then I got to tell you
Hmm.
this. You were both teachers. We're both ex-teachers, Dan. What do you think of this? The government
Hmm.
issued Section 28 to schools in that teachers were not allowed to teach anything to do with the LGBT plus community. So it was almost like they were erasing the existence of the LGBT plus.
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, well, first of all, I think it's disturbing, and also the fact that this was in the early 90s or mid 90s, whenever it was, and the fact that you can kind of point to places in the world right now where that is still a thing.
Yes.
Particularly in the country south of me, there is a lot of erasure of that community, um, in education, and this kind of war almost on education if you dare to tell a child that gay people exist and are worthy in society, and just teach basic human decency and understanding that not everyone is the same and not all families look the same. So it's disheartening to hear back then, and it's even more disturbing that not much has changed in a lot of parts of the world that are, historically democratic and allegedly progressive countries.
Yeah. 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 Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And when you consider that schools are a secondary source of
Hmm.
socialization next to the family, that really is quite
Hmm.
disturbing. Yeah. But again, a sign of the times. It
Absolutely.
was the era at the time.
Hmm.
One more thing that I'm
Hmm.
going to mention, and then I'm going to hand over to you, Dan. Now, in 1979, I did forget this. This is the first man $1 million transfer. This is
Wow.
1979 and Trevor Francis. So what's that? Almost 50
Mm.
years? Trevor Francis,
Yeah.
I, he went from Birmingham to Nottingham Forest. And
Hmm.
today, the last transfer that I looked up on the 24-25 season in this country, okay, was Alexander
Hmm.
Isaac for
Hmm.
125 million. So you consider 1979 was
Wow.
1 million and 24-25 season was
Hmm.
125 million. But that's taken almost 50 years. Now we're already at 2 million for the women's game, aren't we, in America with Trinity Rodman?
Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And it's interesting to hear those figures, and there's a myriad of reasons what the money and financial situations look like in the men's game, of course, but to hear that and to know the historical context of the women's game, especially in England, for those of you who might not be aware, the game was quite banned for about 50 years or whatever it was, until
Yeah,
that ban ended in the early 70s. And then now to know that, okay, a year ago, almost coming up, you had the first £1 million transfer in England with Olivia Smith
yeah,
and so forth. But so to see the trajectory of what that's going to look like for the women's game as well, taking into consideration how long it was between that 1 million to 125 million. But you also have to look at what that period from the 70s up until the present day looks like. And I think we're in a little bit of a different position now because things are so rapidly growing that I think
yeah.
it's going to take a little less to, I don't know if we'll ever get to 125 million, but you will see a larger bounce
Yes.
overall in a little bit quicker of a time frame, I think.
I tend to agree with you because we're in a different era in comparison to what we've just been
Mhm.
talking about, aren't we?
For sure.
And yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I mean that is the reason why we're here. It's about building that community. We believe in it. It's not
Mhm.
just about women's football. It's about women's football being a movement too, because it reflects my
Mhm.
identity. It reflects your identity, I know, because of conversations we had, and it reflects the changing
For sure.
identity of women in throughout the world, doesn't it? One last thing, Dan, and then I'm going to hand over.
Absolutely. Mhm.
In the 1990s, very vaguely, I can remember the women's game being on the horizon. It would have come from the
Mhm.
US. That makes sense to me because, you
Mhm.
know, they
Yeah.
were strides ahead in terms of women's football, weren't they?
Mhm. Mhm. They absolutely were. The 99ers is the one that I remember the big time winning that 1999 World Cup, and that's kind of the big, kickoff for them.
Yeah, absolutely. But it must have been on the news or somewhere,
Mhm.
but it was on my
Mhm.
radar. Not Didn't know too much about
Mhm.
it, but was on the radar. So I'm going to hand over to you now,
Mhm.
Dan.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Bev. Intriguing conversation. I think, depending on the range of audience that we have, and I know my mom's going to be listening, so I think she'll definitely understand just historically kind of the 70s, the 80s eras as well, and then the more present day. And I think depending on our audience, you might get some really interesting comments from people who might remember things that you spoke of as well, whether through news or whether they experienced it or whatever. But yeah, we're gonna start up in the 90s, and that's kind of where I'm gonna take over. And Bev and I have had a lot of conversations off air about kind of where we align in terms of how we understand the game and then kind of how the game shaped us. And then we have some differences as well. And for those who are listening that don't know me personally, and I know a lot of friends will listen, and so this is not going to be surprising to them. But I come from an Italian background. My parents are Italian, and a big immigration background. My grandparents, didn't speak a lot of English. My grandmother still doesn't. So I come from a very heavy immigrant background in terms of the Italian culture, and that culture really shaped me and remains such a prevalent part of my life today. And I think if I have to paint a picture, looking back on the game, and again, my only experience early on was through the men's game. The
Mm,
one picture I'll paint for you is, and for people who are locals and are going to listen to this, you will know my grandparents lived in Toronto, on Caledonia, which was near St. Clair. And Bev, this is a really historically immigrant area, and there was a lot of Italians, especially in the 1990s and into the
mm,
2000s, where they kind of gravitated towards. And it was a part of my understanding of the game because we were in my grandparents' house. Very first memory I have is all of my family. So my cousins were there, my aunts and uncles, and we were around the TV and we were watching the 1994 World Cup final. It was Italy and Brazil. They were in a penalty shootout, and this was the famous um, one where the Italian legend Roberto Baggio, he skied the penalty over the net, and that was the clincher. They lost in that moment. He could have helped them win. And I remember everyone just being absolutely devastated. And I was young, I was like 4 years old, so I didn't fully understand why everyone was so upset by this situation that had just happened. But that is
yeah.
the earliest memory that I have, and how important that was in my family. And if I think about memories that I have of my grandparents, of being together with our family, it always centered around this because in that neighborhood that they lived in, the street that was just, beyond them, a couple minutes down the road, is when Italy won. Everyone congregated on that street, and there was music, and there was cars, and there was flags, and there were bakeries, and people were getting their coffees and having a drink, and it was just such a time of culture and community coming together. And I think that that's something that is so beautiful about where I live, is that we've always been able to do that and still maintain our cultural identities with our, national identities. So that's kind of the earliest memories that I have. And it's kind of counteracted by the fact that being from an immigrant family, we were very traditional in a lot of ways. Not
Mm,
personally in my family in terms of my parents, but I definitely saw kind of what you were talking about, more of those roles. My grandmother was always in the kitchen cooking,
mm,
and the women were always the ones washing dishes, clearing the table, doing all those
yeah.
sorts of things. So it was very segregated roles.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it until I became probably a teenager, what that looked like for me and what that kind of how that shaped my understanding of roles and women. But again, the 90s was also such a period of change, and there was such an uptick in women getting degrees, having a larger education, especially immigrant women. Um, if you've come from that heavy immigrant background, these were things that were maybe you might have been the first person to go to college or university in your family. So it was
Mm,
such an interesting time because we had this cultural identity that was a little bit traditional,
mm,
counteracted with a little bit more of a Canadian, a lot more immigration in Canada, especially like English and Scottish, which were a little bit ahead in terms of what I just mentioned, education and being a little bit more progressive. So
mm,
that was kind of the time that I grew up in the 90s and into the 2000s. But my background again was it helped shaped that culture that I am so proud of today. But it has also raised a lot of questions for me in terms of what is a woman's role in society.
mm.
And when I think of football, women's football, again, the one theme that, you told me to kind of mark down some themes, the one big overarching theme I think is identity. And
Yes,
women have fought for identity throughout every factor of society, not just in sport, not just in education, not just in greater society, but just through everything.
yeah,
And identity is such a big part of who we are. And when I think about what the identity of a woman was, how I grew up, it is very one-dimensional.
yes,
And in terms of sport, yes, my cousins and I, we watched sport with my grandparents, we watched it with our parents. But even into, honestly, even into my early 20s, when I've been around my family members, particularly male family members, and have tried to have conversations about sport and put my own kind of thoughts forward, it's very much, oh, that's great, but not really taken seriously.
yes,
And it's interesting. Yeah, right. And it's interesting to think of now women's football when we spoke about maybe some bad faith characters. Oh, it doesn't really matter. It's very much a similar attitude across the board. And I think
yes,
that's the biggest thing that has come from me is my culture gave me so much. It gave me the love for the game. It gave me so much identity, but it also challenged what I think now of women and what women are capable of and the identity of a woman versus how I saw it growing up.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
when I was introduced, is it okay to jump to 2022? Because that really was,
Absolutely, go for
yeah. I mean,
it.
again, it
Mhm,
links up beautifully
mhm,
with what you've just said, Dan, and the identity of women. I mean, I am the only one to have a degree within my family, men or women. And I do, as I said to you earlier, I think it's very much linked up with mum, and that okay, I'm not
mhm,
saying that she was unhappy, I'm not, or discontented, but there was something within her that just wasn't satisfied on some kind of level or dimension. And I think
mhm,
and as I grew older, and as she grew older, and obviously you bring
mhm,
your own experiences to the mix as a child,
mhm,
coming then into an adult. She did say to me, she said, if I had my time again, and she said, I am not saying that I did not love your dad, I am not saying that. She said, but if I had my
mhm,
time again, I would have done what you did and did it studied for a degree in history because she loved history, and she also loved art.
mhm,
And she said, and done something with that degree. Now, when she
mhm,
died, and I had to sort through all her clothes and things like that, Dan. Now, I was in a bit of
mhm,
I don't know, I was gone. I really didn't. I was just shut down, if I'm honest, when I look back. And that was quite an easy thing to do because
mhm.
it was very quickly after she died. But 12 years later, in a cupboard, I found all her art materials, and that broke me. And I know you well enough. You
Mhm.
will understand why, won't you?
Of
Because
course, because it shows. Yeah, it gives you kind of an insight into this is something she was probably so excited and passionate about and not something she got to fully pursue for whatever
mm,
reason, whether it's she felt she couldn't or didn't have the opportunity to do it or had other
yeah,
responsibilities that weighed so heavily on her that it did
yeah,
not allow that period of, oh, I can do this for myself. And it was a lot of unselfishness in a time
absolutely,
where you just had to be.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. It was her. It was her essence. Those art materials were her essence.
Hmm.
So 2022 for
Exactly.
me. 2022 for me,
Hmm.
I turn on my laptop and there they were, the lionesses.
Mm.
And it wasn't
Hmm.
just the skills on the pitch. It was the interviews after. It was
Hmm.
how they were confident, competent, self-aware. They worked together as a team and
Hmm.
they truly believed, above all else, they truly believed they had the right to be on the pitch playing the game. And I thought not just
Exactly.
playing the game, but for the way they
Hmm.
presented themselves, the way they articulated themselves, their intelligence, they spoke for me as women, and there are very few that
Hmm.
I outsource that to. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, and I'm gonna scale back a little bit on that because my first kind of, again, I had that a little bit of awareness in the late 90s, but my first probably real introduction was here in Canada. We hosted the Women's World Cup in 2015,
Yeah.
and I remember being acutely aware of it. I mean, the games were, I know that they were on TV in scattered ways, and I didn't follow it entirely, but I remember it. Oh, like, and I knew we had a national team, and I had followed them a little bit because we've always performed fairly well at Olympics, for example. And I think 2012 was the first time that we medaled in Olympics. So I definitely had that. And the 2012 was in London, in England, of course. And I remember having that understanding of it. But the 2015 World Cup was really a time where I said, "Oh, they play and they play really, like really, really good, and
Yeah.
they are mesmerizing me the way that they're playing." And honestly, if I can remember exactly, I think it was England's game against Mexico. I'm gonna fact check myself, but I remember a, what was she, 22 years old, 21 years old, Fran Kirby
Oh,
darting
yes.
across that pitch
Yep.
like she owned it. And I
Yeah.
just said, "Who on earth is Fran Kirby?" And I knew that she was a player in England, and I had had, again, a bit of, exposure to English football just because of my family and so forth, but I just I couldn't believe how incredible she was, and that was that period for me, and since then, I've tried so hard to watch a lot of games, and all that accessibility has never been there, up until more recently, but I think your 2022 moment was my 2015 moment because it really made me look at the game differently and realize I can like men's football, but I love watching women play football because to me, there's no difference, in terms of the
Absolutely.
game and the love for the game.
Mm.
And
Mm.
how incredible it is that we're now in this era where we can look back on some of these memories, some a little bit longer than others, and say, and have that same kind of feeling, oh, they belong here. Like they deserve to be here and they belong here and they played like it. And I remember feeling that in 2015 too. So it's interesting that we have that very similar experience with it, just at different periods.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just didn't know they exist. Like I said, from some vague recollection in, 1990s.
Mhm.
Definitely, I can remember
Mhm.
that. But, I wonder
Mhm.
about, I mean, we're talking a lot about culture and sociology and background in heritage in politics. All these
Mhm.
strands are interconnecting, aren't they, in the women's and the men's game
Yeah,
too. I would say,
absolutely.
I mean, when I think about, I looked up when football for the women's game started in this country, and it was the First World
Mhm.
War in 1917. So all the men would have been
Mhm.
out of the country. Most of the men, sorry, would have been out of the country, and they would have been fighting the war, the First World War. And then there was a
Mhm.
change then in the roles of the women. It's interesting. You mentioned about the roles. I've mentioned about the roles of women as well. And everything was turned on its
Mhm.
head. It was exceptional and unusual because the women were working in municipal factories. They were out, making in large factories, making shells, for guns and for ammunition for planes,
Mhm.
etc. Um, and it
Mhm.
was the factories that this decided that, you know, the women needed some kind of leisure. They needed to bond together. They needed to look after them because a woman back then
Hmm.
was her father's daughter, and then she would be handing over
Of
to
course.
her husband's woman. Yeah, you know, yeah, yeah. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
a property thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
Um, and it was
Yep.
exceptional and unusual. And yes, these women, they put together, you know, football teams. They played each other up in Coventry. One city played another.
Hmm.
And, you know, to an audience of 21,000 at times,
Hmm.
21,000,
Hmm.
you know, and we're not talking
Yeah.
stadiums, we're just
It's
talking
crazy.
bog standard grounds. But I'm
Hmm.
wondering, is there a correlation? Because, like I said, it was exceptional and unusual circumstances. But then if you look at 1920, 1920, 19, oh, I'll get off the 19s in a minute, 2022, it was just coming out of
Yes.
COVID, just coming out of COVID.
Right.
And that was also exceptional and unusual times as well,
Hmm.
in that people, you know,
Hmm.
we were all in isolation. And I think people have built a thirst to be outside with one another in community and public events. And I think the timing might have been just perfect for the 22 Euros, the women's Euros. What's your thoughts on that? Yeah,
I do. I agree. And from that side of it, again, coming out of COVID, and we all kind of went through a really rough time in terms of being in isolation and what that looked like. But I also think COVID, I was reading this article, and COVID also challenged a lot of people in terms of their own identity, in terms of their own wants and desires, just overall in life, because
yeah,
a lot of relationships ended in COVID. There's, it sounds funny, but it's not. There was I read an article and it said the grand rising of lesbianism came out of COVID as well. I don't know if women just lived with men and they said, I don't want, this is not what I've ever
mm,
wanted in life, whatever it is. I know it
mm,
sounds funny, but it's true. There's a
mm,
lot more queer expression coming out of COVID as well. So I really think it was a time of challenging what we had thought about in terms of our lives, our
mm,
society, how things
mm.
function,
Yeah,
and then add in the fact that everyone kind of had cabin fever too. And it
yeah,
was, oh, this is going on. I'm going to go do this. Oh, I'm going to take that trip that I've been putting off for 10 years.
yeah,
You know what? There's a game going on tonight and it's the Euros. Let's go to the Euros. Why not?
yeah,
Right. And it's a time of coming back together as a community because we were
yeah.
so disconnected for so long too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
COVID didn't do this. These things already
Hmm.
existed. It was almost like COVID put
Hmm.
the spotlight, the microscope under
On them.
people's lives. And I mean, if I remember
Exactly.
rightly, the divorce spiked, you know, following COVID
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
people were together.
Yep.
And
Of
like you
course.
said, yeah, they were together and they thought,
Hmm.
no, I just
It's
don't want to be with you. I've got cracks in this marriage or this
exactly.
relationship, and I don't want to be with you. I want to go and attend the game. I
Hmm.
want to go round the world. I want to be a student again and study something that I love. So all these dreams and
Hmm.
ambitions and aspirations came to the fore, I think.
Hmm. And it's also, and then when you think about sport, sports are all always evolving and changing. And women's sports, not just even women's football, I think just in general has had an explosion, I would say, in the last 10 years. I mean, if you just look at
Mm,
even what the WNBA is doing with now they're having $1 million contracts, all of this stuff that's happening. And so I think because of those times that we were in with that COVID period, it actually forced a lot of people to express themselves in different ways. So people maybe that were like, oh, I just like to watch sports, just on occasion, were really craving watching those sports again and really realizing, oh, there's value in everyone who plays sport, not just men. It's not just for men, by men for men. Like I can enjoy this as a woman as well. And there's a lot more understanding of that. And I think that's part of that growth of women's football as well, especially in the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, whatever it might be.
absolutely. Yeah, the stars were aligning, really, weren't they? Just to, you know, this
Hmm.
timeline, this wonderful rich tapestry that we've been discussing. Can I ask you to pick out the common
Yeah.
denominators and patterns then, and I'll add mine to it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think. Um, le- uh, the biggest thing I thought of was identity,
Yeah,
and belonging. And I think
yeah.
legacy is an interesting one that you brought up. It wasn't too, I mean, it was pretty prevalent, but it kind of stuck out to me because there is a legacy to everything. So starting from your 70s, whether it was to do with sport, whether it was to do with historical context, whatever it might be, up to the present day, you talking about, what the Lionesses did in 2022, like that legacy is so strong, and legacy can be interpreted different ways as well. It can be positive, it can be negative, depending on how what has kind of transpired to shape it. But
Mm,
definitely identity and legacy are probably the biggest ones, and then change. So much
yeah.
change that we've talked about, and maybe not enough as well in a lot of ways too.
Mm, I totally agree with you.
Hmm.
And I'm picking out tension
Hmm.
between groups. So we've got black and we've got white,
Mm.
we've got gay, we've got, and homophobia, non-gay, the police and power
Hmm.
and control,
Hmm.
hierarchy, all relates really to, they're
Oh yeah,
all intersecting strands of identity, aren't they?
they really are. Yes, they definitely are, and they all kind of feed into that. And it's so interesting how we can look at something like sport and say, oh, it's just sport, it's just a game. But all of these things have shaped, whether it's football, whether whatever sport it might be, have shaped the identity of that game, of those games,
Yeah,
of those sports, whatever it is.
yeah,
And that what they can't exist without all of those things. Unfortunately, there's no
absolutely,
such thing as sport. Yeah, there's no such thing as sport is not political, sport is not this. It always has been because of all these things we've talked
absolutely,
about.
absolutely. I would say
Hmm.
politics with a capital P and politics with a small p, as in terms of what happens in clubs internally. Transfer fees, what
Exactly.
the board of member, the chairperson does. It's that all those
Hmm.
kind of things, isn't it? The hierarchy of management, etc. That's the
Absolutely.
politics with a small p within there. And the last one I would add, just the
Hmm.
common denominators, is ignorance and lack of education, or education, depending on who you are. So the ignorance in terms of
Hmm.
throwing down the cigarette and that lighting up the stadium, the ignorance in terms of LGBTQ plus
Hmm. Hmm.
community, all those things. It's about lack of education, information, and
Hmm.
education, isn't it? Just it's a complete
All of
lack of
it.
ignorance.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of
I
rounding
think
up now.
I think it's
Sorry, go.
mhm.
You
No,
think?
no, no, go for
No, 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 you go.
it. Go for it. Okay, yeah, so I was just gonna say, yeah, rounding it all up, because we are coming up on time here, and I think we're gonna try to maybe be better with our time for sure. Because Bev and I can talk forever. You guys will probably hear that as we go forward. Yeah, I think rounding it all up, it's gonna be an interesting to listen back to this, and I hope our listeners get an understanding of why we wanted to do this little introductory episode and kind of explain how we came to love the game, from different ways, and obviously stemming from one side of the game, and then also what to expect from us, because these are the types of conversations, not historical and so forth, but we are going to have in-depth conversations around the women's game, things that are currently happening, things that are moving forward, and kind of what that looks like, what that growth looks like moving forward. So this is just a little peek into what you're going to expect from us for sure.
Absolutely. Shall I set the next
Mhm.
topic so that the those that are listening can comment, ready for the
Yes,
next
yes,
episode?
please go for it.
So the
Mhm.
topic is women's game, different, unequal, but football nonetheless. I'll repeat that. The women's game,
Mhm.
different, unequal, but football nonetheless. So please put your
Can't
comments.
wait.
Please put your comments in
Definitely.
because we would
Yep.
like to pull upon these. So, about the first 15 minutes of the next podcast will be about from around the world, from the
Mhm.
WSL, the NWSL, what's going on in Canada. About 10-15 minutes, and then we'll
Mhm.
move on to the deep dive. Yeah, this will be the one.
Yep,
The women's game, different.
absolutely, yeah. You will get you mhm.
Yep, go
Yep,
on.
we will get some recaps and so forth. Yeah, we will get some recaps and so forth in the first 10, 15 minutes, like Bev said. But then we're going to dive into this topic, and this is how we're going to structure our episodes going forward. So we would love to hear from you all, and hopefully we can build this really intriguing and interesting community where we chat a lot and maybe have some laughs and enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, please remember we're also on Instagram and we're also on Facebook, so we can
Yes,
continue the conversations.
absolutely. Bev, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon for you. I know the Lionesses have a game this afternoon or early
They
evening for you,
certainly
and
do.
I look forward to and I certainly do. I look forward to watching that one. Maybe see some rotation in that starting 11. We'll see what happens, but definitely good luck to the Lionesses. And we will speak to you guys very soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.